Good evening everybody, it's your pal Martin Metalhead here, hope you're going well. Filming this on a second-hand iPhone X I just bought and got repaired this past week. Today is a really special day because 20 years ago today I became a metalhead. Yes, I became Martin the Metalhead, even though previously I was only a metalhead before then. But it was on this day 20 years ago I bought a copy of Metallica's Black Album, self-titled album Metallica, that sold like roughly 17 million copies in the United States and sold maybe 40 million around the world. So it was Metallica's best-selling album, even though a lot of true die-hard metalheads would say it's a piece of shit because it's not really thrash enough. Just by that album, I thought to myself, man, this is the music I'm going to listen to as I enter adulthood, because I was 19 at the time, going on 20. I became 20 a few weeks later. So that was my first metal album I ever bought. I remember around that time I was listening to it was Metallica, and I was listening to Slipknot. And even though this doesn't really sound metal enough, I really started listening to Def Leppard after my 20th birthday, after watching their Live 8 performance, yes. I know a lot of people say Def Leppard isn't really that much of a metal band, but even though you could count as like the first EP as new album, even though they ditched metal to become really popular and sell albums across America, and it's a known fact that Def Leppard did, Def Leppard have sold more records in America than the home country Britain. Now, that's just Slipknot, okay? A lot of people really hate new metal. I don't really see new metal as a tag. But what you gotta understand is, like, all the guys in Slipknot, like, you know, Clown, and Corey, and Joey, they were all influenced on bands of the 80s and 90s. Even, I remember Corey Taylor once said after he had attempted a drug overdose and he survived, he was watching Faith No More. Now, you could basically say Faith No More is really much of a metal band, or Faith No More pretty much had the blueprints for new metal. The other time in my life, hearing that really open chord riff before I forget was really badass. Because you gotta remember, at the time of my life, my mom told me that Olivia Newton-John was a piece of shit, and I should stop listening to her. And then also Kylie Minogue had breast cancer, and I thought, I don't know what's gonna happen to her. Is she gonna live or is she gonna die? So in the following year of 2006, I was buying lots of albums. I remember buying my first Iron Maiden album, A Matter of Life and Death, for the day that it came out. I really got into the new wave of British heavy metal, so I was downloading a lot of Saxon, Judas Priest, Motorhead, Demon, Venom, which Venom led me into a lot of extreme forms of metal music, a lot of death and a lot of black metal. You could say Venom pretty much wrote the blueprints to black metal. Yeah. And so I remember this one year on my birthday, I got Among the Living by Anthrax, and then I also started listening to a lot of the thrash metal bands. I remember in 2007, I saw my first metal concert, which was Slayer with Mastodon and Mortal Sin. Now, I listened to a lot of Slayer, a lot of the early stuff, and I'm really glad that I got to see Slayer live, even though it was like 6 years later. The guitarist of Slayer had passed away, Jeff. Yeah, that was really sad circumstances, but I was really glad I got to see the original lineup of Slayer, even though I also saw Paul Bostaph in Testament the following year. That one year, I also, in 2007, I saw Heaven and Hell with Ronnie James Dio and two members of the original Black Sabbath lineup, Geezer Butler, Tony Iommi, and then Vinny Appice. That was also a special concert because years later, Ronnie James Dio passed away. In the same year, I went to see Rat and Winger, a double bill, and then I went to see Megadeth's Gigantour that had Lacuna Coil, Bring Me the Horizon, Devil Driver, and Static X. A lot of these bands, to people who like thrash metal, I would really think all of these bands are really crap and all. But yeah, I do have good memories. I got to see Static X, even though I don't like industrial music. It's just quite sad what happened to Wayne Static. As for Devil Driver, I met Dez a couple of years later. He was a really cool person, and he really admired my patch jacket. So this one concert that changed my life, which you all know about, was Dream Theater. I remember my brother passed me to buy tickets to see Dream Theater, and I was the first progressive band that I ever saw because prior to that I was listening to a lot of prog rock of the 1970s, and then I discovered what had happened when you merged prog rock and heavy metal. You get prog metal. That's how you got Queensryche, that's how you got Fates Warning, that's how you got Dream Theater, that's how you got Sympathy X. Dream Theater only changed my life. I just remember leaving the concert, I thought to myself, man, should I really just stop listening to today's shitty music? And days later, after buying Queensryche Operation Mindcrime, I smashed all my Kylie Minogue albums. It's a hard fact to say, like, yeah, I used to listen to Kylie Minogue, but I don't know anybody in the metal industry that has ever had any influence from Kylie. I don't think Kylie Minogue's ever done any metal covers. I don't think Kylie Minogue's ever collaborated with a heavy metal artist. And I've made a simple joke and a simple fact that if Kylie Minogue was to get inducted into the Rock Hall of Fame before Queensryche and Dream Theater, I would become I would convert to Orthodox Judaism. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to stick to my guns. Yes. So at 22, I was buying lots of records. I remember buying Twisted Sister, Black Sabbath, Virgin Steel, Rat, Winger, Queensryche. I even found the first ever Dream Theater album at a record shop in Newtown. And I remember the day I bought it, I was driving past all these Kylie fans leaving Lincoln Station, and I flipped them off by telling them to listen to Dream Theater. So I knew that all the bands I liked wouldn't come to Australia, my home country, so I would go to them. On my first tour in 2010, I saw Steel Panther at the House of Blues, I saw Rat in New York City, I saw Winger in, just outside Chicago with Ted Polly and Trickster. I saw Heart, even though it's not really metal, it's still hard rock. That was in Phoenix. I went to Maryland Death Fest, I saw Rat in New York City. And then the following year, I went to Hellfest in 2011. I saw the Scorpions, my favorite German band of all time, and I was really glad I got to see them, along with Coroner, Creator, Sodom, Destruction, Whiplash, Ozzy Osbourne, Iggy Pop and the Stooges, Rob Zombie, even though he's not really much metal, and then as well like Dora and Sympathy X. And then the following year, I remember going to Headbangers Open Air in 2012, and I saw a lot of cult bands who never made it big. But the funny thing was, they were all big in Germany. But this one incident at Hellfest, when some guy pissed on my tent, I just realized that I can't stand these 3-day festivals because I thought I was missing out on a lot of the world. I'd rather be seeing beautiful stuff in France rather than having to camp next to a grapevine and be disconnected from the rest of the world. But I did go to Lord of the Lands up in Glasgow about 7 years ago, where I got to see Dark Angel. Quite an epic gig when they just reunited for the first time in a couple of years. And just recently, Dark Angel have put out their first album since the early 90s. I take pride that I got to move to London because I got to see many different metal bands since moving here. I mean, my first gig I ever saw in this country was a combination of Armored Saint, Death Angel, and Queensryche. And then when I came back in May 2016, I saw Metal Church and the King Diamond. And upon moving back, I moved back to Birmingham, I saw Anthrax, I saw Dream Theater. And then when I moved to London, I started seeing a lot of local bands that were like really hard rock and heavy metal. Not really so much metal, but still in the rock scene. Like Doja and Flower Pot and Joan of Arc and Soteria. I thought a lot of those bands were like around London. But also, I started seeing a lot of different bands in London, such as Anvil and Voivod. I saw Lee Aaron a month after moving to London. The next day I saw Toxic in the same venue. Then I saw St. Vitus with my buddy Dave Welsh from Tabera. I saw, I saw Anvil. I saw Diamond Head once in a pub in London, which was quite surprising that it was still going around. Diamond Head, one of the biggest influences on Metallica. And so, despite the pandemic, I'm still seeing metal bands every now and then. I mean, wearing this Voivod shirt to honor that Voivod was the first band I saw upon moving to London in 2017. Yeah, so 20 years as a metalhead. I'm quite glad that, I've been able to travel the world and meet other metalheads in really, obscure countries. I remember walking down the streets in San Salvador, El Salvador, and seeing flyers for a metal gig that was happening way after I left. I thought, yeah, El Salvador has a metal scene. But I've also, one time when I was in South Africa, there was a band I could have seen was Rust, a death metal band from Botswana. And I've been knowing them for like many years, but I was on the wrong side of South Africa at the time and I missed out on the concerts. Also, I've met a lot of metalheads from around the world. Like, I remember living in Australia, I met up with a guy called Jeff who was from China. One time, I met a guy from Nepal with a pestilence tattoo in Sydney. And, in London, you tend to meet all sorts of different metalheads from all around the world. So, being a metalhead was the best thing that ever happened in my life. My next big ambition would be, still travel, but then trying to find some really obscure bands. Like, I kind of wish instead of spending like a day in Jerusalem this year, I could have spent a whole week in Israel and maybe tried to source out some of these old classic bands from Israel like Salem, which those guys are quite a bit, well, they're unknown outside of Israel, but to anybody who's from Israel, they'll be like, yeah, Salem. But also, I kind of think I really should try to go to some sort of obscure country, like, United Arab Emirates. I mean, come on, there's got to be metal gigs that happen in the UAE every now and then. My favorite band, Dream Theater, is actually playing in India next year, even though I've had no desire to go back to India. They're also playing in Indonesia, which is a giant country full of metalheads. Even the ex-president, Joko Widodo, was a metalhead himself. Yeah, so, anyway, to anybody out there, living a really crappy life and because you've been stuck listening to really shit music, give heavy metal a lesson or change your life. I'm Mark the Metalhead. I'm over and out.